Got a botched or mismatched paint job like this on your car? Well, don't worry, in this video I'm going to show you the entire process of fixing it so it goes from looking like this to this, meaning you cannot tell a difference between where the mismatch was and the rest of the panel. For more on every step of the car flipping process, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next weekly upload. My name's Benjamin McShannock and welcome back to Ben Flips Cars. Step 1 is going to be to wash down the panel as you would normally. So give it a good hose down, then a good scrub with some car wash soap mixed into warm water. Rinse it off again, then finish it off with a good towel down, rub any excess dirt off and dry the panel as best you can. Step 2 is to mask up around the area to protect the surrounding panels from when we sand down through the clear coat and into the paint. In doing that, we don't want to scuff or damage the surrounding panels and create unnecessary work for ourselves. So around the lights, spoiler, other panels, stuff like that. So you can see here, because we're working with this area here, we're going to be sanding around this area. We don't want to accidentally scratch our tail light here, so that's why we've masked that off. A little bit of the spoiler there we've masked off as well, and this part here we also don't want to damage. Later on I'll also be covering up the badge, but I don't think we'll have to do that until we paint because we're not going to be sanding all the way over there. So to explain what we're going to do here, the way that a car panel works is obviously you have the base panel, which is either metal or plastic, and then you have the primer painted over the top of that, and then the actual paint, which gives the car its color, and then you have the clear coat, which gives the car its reflective shine, that gloss reflective shine. So all we're trying to do here is break through the clear coat, especially along these hard lines, so that we can put more paint down to feather the new paint from the old paint so that you can't notice the difference. If we break through the paint a little bit, that's okay. We just don't want to go heaps through it because then we'll have to put down more primer before putting on the paint. So let's get to sanding away this clear coat. Step 3 is to wet sand with 800 grit sandpaper. Wrap the sandpaper around a sponge to avoid creating hot spots as you sand. We want to break through the clear coat evenly and smoothly for the best possible finish later on. You particularly want to focus on the hard lines where the mismatched paint is with the 800 grit sandpaper. Really make sure the panel and sandpaper are properly wet while sanding. Feel free to add more water as you sand. This will help avoid clogging the sandpaper and mean easier work, plus a smoother finish. Once you start to see parts of the paint beginning to sand away, you know you've gone deep enough and broken through the clear coat, and even some of the paint, which is fine as we'll be adding more paint over the top. Once you've broken through the clear coat and everything feels smooth and even, we can move on to the next step. Step 4 is to just give the panel a quick rinse off with water, and then towel it off again with a microfiber towel to clean off all the wet sanding residue. As we're moving on to the much finer 1500 grit sandpaper, we want the panel to be clean to avoid clogging it up quickly with the wet sanding residue. So we've finished our 800 grit sand. You can see we've taken away all that harsh line. It's sort of blending in now. It's patchy, which means, and this grey here, I think it means we've gone not just through the paint, but also a little bit through into the panel a bit. So that's the bare metal panel under there. Same with along here. So you really don't want to go much more than that. We covered, everything feels smooth, everything feels even, which is what you want. You feathered that 800 out a little bit this way, just so that we can blend our paint together more, and down here a little bit also as well. Up here a tad as well, but you can't really see what's going on under the spoiler much anyway, so I'm not too fussed about that. And we also made sure to go along this edge a little bit as well, with of course the masking tape protecting the light. You can see that line is all patchy now, it's not a hard line anymore. This is how it's meant to look. We've successfully gone through pretty much all of the clear coat and even a little bit of the paint, which tells you that you did definitely get through all that clear coat. Now let's go over it with 1500 grit sandpaper to smooth it out. Now with the 1500 grit wet sandpaper, we want to go over absolutely everything we're going to be painting, feather out just a little bit more for that smooth transition, and at the end of it everything should feel really smooth and flat. Despite the patchiness, everything should feel smooth. When you close your eyes, it shouldn't feel like there's any bumps or any imperfections. So same thing again. Wrap the sandpaper and the sponge, get the sandpaper and panel generously wet for an easier and smoother time sanding. And step 6 is to again rinse the panel off with water and wipe off any of the sanding residue with a microfiber towel. Obviously we don't want any of that on there when applying the new paint. Once you finish with the 1500 grit sandpaper, with your eyes closed, everything should be buttery smooth. You should be able to feel no bumps or imperfections, anything like that, despite the patchy look, because once we put the paint down, it's going to go over the top of this and you're not going to see any of the patchiness anymore. But if you can feel bumps, the bumps are still going to show through the paint when you put it down. So very important to make sure everything's smooth before we move on to the next step. As we're waiting for the panel to completely finish drying off, we can go to the driver's door sticker and find our car's paint code. You can see here it says paint Paint 09. With this paint code, you can go to your local auto or specialist paint shop. In this case, I went to Super Cheap Auto and have them make up a custom paint can to your car's paint code. So you can see that silver in the top, it's the same silver as we have on the actual car. Because we've used the car's paint code, it's going to be a very close to exact match. It may differ ever so slightly because of the aging of the paint on the car. So if you want it to be exactly the same, you can go to a specialist paint shop where they'll actually scan the paint on your car and come up with the exact paint code that it is at this exact moment in time, and then they'll make up a can to that color for you. But for an older car like this is going to be fine. It's going to be very close to the exact color anyway. And with how we're going to blend it, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. Step 8 is now that we have our can of paint ready, it's time to make our final preparations to paint. This means we want to mask up all the surrounding panels that we want to avoid getting any paint overspray on whilst painting our mismatched area. Just some cut open garbage bags stuck on with masking tape will do the job just fine. Now crucially, with our garbage bags, we don't want to cover any of the actual panel that we're painting onto. Of course, we want to cover off the spoiler, other panels, parts like this, which is a completely different part from the rest of the panel, the badge of course as well. But if we cover up, say here or here, we're just going to end up with another line like what we started with. So that's why we want to make sure the rest of the panel's left exposed. That's going to allow us to be able to feather the paint in just a little from this new paint on the panel to this old paint on the panel and get a nice blend where you can't tell the difference. Really take your time masking everything up. You don't want to find a surprise hole somewhere. If you left a gap in the badge, for example, and you end up with a surprise patch of paint on your badge when you take your masking off later, you don't want that. So make sure you take your time with the masking tape to ensure that you're not going to get any paint where you don't want it to be. Step 9, in order to get the panel completely clean so we don't paint over the top of any dust or dirt, hit the panel with some isopropyl alcohol and wipe it off with a clean microfiber towel. Then right before we paint, hit it with a tack cloth. This is simply a sticky, tacky cloth that will grab any of the remaining dust or dirt stuck to the panel as you wipe it over the panel. Did you buy a car with mismatched paint, or are you trying to fix a bad job that you did yourself? Let me know your story in the comments below and any tips you have that may help others in fixing it. If your car happens to have peeling, lacquer or clear coat, check out this video up in the corner after you finish watching this one. It's a very similar process to fix it. So now it's time for our paint. You want to ensure you're in still and dry conditions. You can see the wind has picked up, unfortunately, just a little bit now. So just going to have to be careful. Ideally, you'd do this indoors, but doing it outdoors in the appropriate conditions is okay. Also try and avoid being near any trees and plants where pollen or anything else could fall onto the paint whilst it's drying and contaminate it. For the most part, you just want to follow the instructions on the can here. So you can see in this distance, it says 3 to 5 light coats with 5 to 10 minutes drying time between coats. And make sure to give the can a really good shake for at least a minute before you start painting, otherwise you risk the paint coming out in big blotches. In this particular instance, we obviously want to paint over the hard lines to cover them up, but we also want to feather out slightly into the rest of the panel. Not so far that you create a ton of extra work for yourself, but just enough so that you get a nice smooth transition between the new paint and the paint on the rest of the panel. Technique is very important when spraying with a can. Basically, when spraying, you always want to be moving the can. Otherwise, it'll come out as a big runny blob. So begin moving, hold and spray, stop spraying, and then you can stop moving. Have your first coat light. This helps to give the following layers something to adhere better to. Also, as you can see me doing, be sure to continue shaking the can between coats to ensure the paint keeps coming out of the can smoothly. So we've finished our paint. Ignore how this bit looks different. It's just a bit wetter than the rest of it. Once it dries, it should all blend together. But you can see that line we had down here, pretty much completely gone. You really can't see it. And same with the one we had here. So that's all blended into the panel nicely now. And once this dries, it's going to be completely matte, a matte, uniform, even finish. Now, according to our can, we want to wait about 30 to 40 minutes before we apply our clear coat, and that's going to be the last painting step. You can see after letting it dry off for about half an hour, this bit's still a tad wet. I really did overdo it a bit there, but you can really see just how much better the rest of the panel looks. You can barely notice those transitions anymore. And once we clear coat this and polish it up, it's going to look even better. So after allowing for the 30 to 40 minutes for the paint to dry, we want to apply our final layer, which is our clear coat. This is what protects your car's paint and gives it that glossy finish and shiny reflection that you can see yourself in. Before we apply it, you want to double check all of your masking up and your bags, because we don't want to end up with clear coat on any places we don't want it, and the bags could have shifted whilst you're away letting the car dry. If you're happy that those are all okay, you want to hit it with your tack cloth one more time time. That'll help pull out any contaminants that may have landed on the car whilst you're letting it dry, and make sure the panel is clean for the clear coat. Now for the clear coat you get, ideally you want it to be 2K clear coat, as it gives the best instant glossy result on the car. Unfortunately, general auto stores where I live don't sell them, so I just had to go for this clear coat here. Just make sure if you don't get 2K, you get one that dries clear, is UV resistant. That's going to prevent the paint from fading, and also that it has a high gloss finish, which means it's reflective and you're going to see yourself in it, and that's going to make it like the rest of the car's panel, like you can see over here, where you can see the reflection. Once again, give the can a really good shake up and follow the instructions on it. In this case, it's 3 to 4 light coats with 3 minutes to dry in between coats. Again, start with a nice light coat first for all the other coats to better adhere to, then nice heavy coats to help better bring out the glossy finish of the clear coat. Exact same technique as the paint spray can. Never stop moving while spraying and continually shake up the can between coats. And we want to feather the clear coat out ever so slightly further than how far we sprayed the paint on, once again to help with the transition between the old and new paints. And there you go, our clear coating's all finished. You can see it's a lot more glossy, a lot more reflective, and it's really blending in with the panel a lot more. But as this dries, the glossiness is going to fade a bit. So after giving this a full 24 hours to dry, we're going to come back, wet sand this a little bit more, and give it its compound and polish, which is going to make it really blend in and really shine like the rest of the panel. And here we go, this is the next day. You can see it's looking a lot more blended in with the rest of the panel. You can still see maybe a little bit of a line with certain lights, so maybe we didn't go over the paint well enough in that area, but hopefully as we finish it off it's going to come out better. Also, unfortunately, you can see this isn't water, this is clear coat, which has run overnight. It was a fairly cold night, so obviously it didn't dry as quickly as it could have, and it's run. So what we're going to do to get rid of this is just wet sand just these drops, so to speak, with 1000 grit wet sandpaper, getting them flat with the rest of the clear coat. That'll make them go away, and then sand the rest of it, compound and polish, and we're going to get our really reflective result like we have down here, for example, where you can really see yourself, or over here is a better example, you can see me in the reflection. Over here you can sort of a little bit, but we're going to make it like the rest basically. So step 12 is to wet sand our clear coat. In my case, because of those clear coat drop marks, I'm just wrapping some 1000 grit sandpaper around this block so that it's nice and square, and sanding away those drop marks as best I can. Normally you wouldn't have to do this if you'd done a better job than I did, so it shows the importance of applying light coats so that the clear coat doesn't run when drying. What you would normally do is wet sand over everything we've painted and clear coated, not focusing on any particular spot. You start with 1500 grit, once again wrap it in your sponge and get everything well lubricated. You don't want to sand too much or too hard, as you risk breaking through the new clear coat, meaning you'd have to apply more again. Just going up and down once and then across once should be enough. Rinse and wipe off the residue so you don't clog up the next grit, the very fine 2000 grit sandpaper. Same thing, be light, cover everything, and keep the panel and sandpaper well lubricated. Feather out just a little bit more into the surrounding panel than you did with the 1500 grit. Rinse and wipe again for the final grit of sandpaper, which is extremely fine, 3000 grit. Once again, feather out slightly more than the 2000 grit. We've finished our sanding and made sure to clean and properly dry off the panel so that it's all clean for our compounding. You can see after our sanding, of course, the panel actually looks worse than before we did it. It's really taken that gloss away, but don't worry, the compound's really going to bring it back so that it shines like here on the other side. You can see where we tried to get away those droplet marks. I'm hoping we didn't break through the clear coat. We're going to find out as we compound it now. We're going to compound it with this quality compound here, Maguire's Ultimate Compound. I recommend using this. It works really well. Some compounds don't work as well as a higher quality one. Ideally, you should compound in cool, shady, dry conditions. According to this bottle, the weather has cooled down and the clouds have come over, so more or less perfect conditions for it. We're going to apply some of the compound onto a polishing pad. You can be fairly generous, but you don't want to put so much on that it never rubs in. Something like that will do just fine to start with. Begin rubbing the sanded area and rub a lot. It will take at least 5 to 10 minutes of constant polishing before the shine begins to come back to the clear coat. Even once the compound looks all rubbed in, keep going. You'll know you're getting close when the pad starts to feel like it's gliding a bit more, plus you'll see the shine slowly start to come out. Then let the compound haze up for a minute or so. You can rub your finger to test if that's happened, then buff off the residue with a clean microfiber towel. And check out this end result. Remember, before and after. You can see that original mismatch we had, there's really very little sign of it. You really can't notice it from a distance, and the white line here is completely gone. Unfortunately, it looks like we did rub off a little bit of clear coat when sanding away those wet marks, and yeah, unfortunately it's not my best ever paint job I've done, but I was in a rush to get this done. And it's not perfect, but does it look better than it did before? 100% yes. You can see basically the boot's looking more or less symmetrical again, whereas before it just looked weird with that patch in the corner. And you can really see how good that paint is shining, and it's very similar to the shine in the rest of the body, which is great. If you take your time better, you can definitely avoid ending up with little patches like this, little runs like this. You would have been able to fade that line out better with a little bit more paint, but I really was in a rush last night to get the painting done. But this is good enough for me. I'm happy with how this has come out. With a bit more patience, it would look totally perfect. Once again, if you missed my video on fixing peeling lacquer or clear coat, should be up on the screen now. If you have any questions, drop it in a comment below, or to message me directly. I'm on TikTok and Instagram, also at Ben Flips Cars. Leave a like to help me out with the YouTube algorithm, and subscribe so you don't miss the next weekly upload. My name's Benjamin McShannock, and thank you for watching Ben Flips Cars.